What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, it is playoff week. First of all, cheers to that. Cheers to that. Playoff week, man. How about it? I am so fired up. We're not doing playoff preview stuff today. We're going to save that for the pod that's going to drop on Thursday. But we do have our good friend, Peach Bowl CEO Gary Stokan. He's going to join us in a bit. We've also got a Florida-Tulane preview. Gary Stokan, a true OG guest of this pod. Someone that has been coming on for 7 years. It's crazy to believe that. Yeah. So great to be able to talk with him. And then we're going to preview the Gasparilla Bowl with Florida and Tulane, lad of the week as well. But just cheers, man. Playoff week, like 12-team playoff. We are officially at the place that if you're a college basketball fan, you know how exciting this week is. And I'm not saying it's an exact comp. All right, we've got more chaos associated with the NCAA tournament than we do with college football playoff in the 12-team era. But just the fact that we're at this point, this was the point that I just wanted to be able to soak in and appreciate all the different things that can happen, and the fact that we've got a great slate ahead of college football playoff games in these first rounds.
Yeah, it's definitely an adjustment, right? Especially like the weird thing about college football is that there's like transfer portal stuff going on too. So you got like, it feels like that divide until they ideally clean up that calendar, which take your time, guys. But it feels like, we got these teams that are legitimately in the most important part of the season. And, you have like the random, like the Penn State backup quarterback that's opting out. But then you have teams like my mid team that are like, let me restock. So like, it's the funniest time in college football because you have like 12 teams that are like, we're all warriors. We die for each other. And then you have other teams like, I think we use some help at the end.
Yeah. Well, by the way, we'll talk about that as well with Gary Stokan about reshaping the college football calendar, how there's no easy fix, and why the system definitely feels broken, but nobody really has a solution at this point, because otherwise you would just say, why are guys transferring at this exact time? Well, it's because you're not going to be able to get into your school that you're trying to go to, and you're not going to be eligible to play football, and you're not going to be able to have those credits transfer over and be able to do spring ball and all that different stuff. Or at least makes that process a lot more difficult than if you do it in the other window. And that's why it's broken up the way that it is. And if you say like, all right, well, you can still transfer it, that's why they have a second window. The offers are a little bit different, and they don't necessarily teams don't want to go after their quarterbacks post spring. And there's a great risk associated with it. That's definitely factored into it. So it's not an easy situation. So that was like the one bit of like misinformation that I saw being thrown out there with the Penn State backup quarterback. And, remember Malik Murphy last year with Texas and how difficult that was for the Longhorns to know that was going to be his decision going in. But anyways, we don't have to.
Hey, you know what? It's playoff time and it's also a holiday season. So if your team missed out on a quarterback, your spring guy can be Jaden Daniels. Don't worry about it. Just you're good. Be happy. Watch the playoff. Enjoy your family. You'll figure it out eventually.
Jaden Daniels is kind of a spring guy, but kind of not.
Right.
Because he transferred in February, decided he was going to LSU in early March. There was rumors that he was already enrolled at LSU, so it was a little bit different. I don't know. Maybe not the best example, but you're right. You'll get Jaden Daniels if you're going after quarterback post-spring.
Get that Hopium out there. Let's watch this playoff.
Yes, exactly. All right. Of course, we got to talk Heisman. Travis Hunter wins the Heisman Trophy, in case you somehow didn't see. Barely edged out Ashton Jeanty. Closest margin of victory since 2009. I didn't think it'd be that close, but I was kind of hoping that it would be that close. And here's what I mean by that. I know it was difficult for me to decide. I had a real debate about who I was going to put for that top spot between Jeanty and Hunter. And I didn't submit my ballot until Sunday after conference championship weekend. I vow to you, listeners to the show, anybody that's ever consumed a piece of my content, that will be me always. I'm not going to submit my ballot before conference championship weekend, even if I think that the three guys I'm going to put on my ballot aren't even playing conference championship weekend. Let's get all the data out there. Let's make sure that we have every piece of information possible before making a decision like that, because I take it very seriously, as I would like to think anybody who listens to me, who reads my stuff, would know that. Yeah, seriously. Also, I did that because I wanted to be able to watch the Mountain West Championship, and I wanted to lock in to everything Ashton Jeanty was doing and make sure that his workload got the full credit that it deserved before I made this decision. And his workload is unreal. And we can get into whether or not Barry Sanders should count his bowl game stats as part of that record, whatever. I don't care. It's awesome. And he's been just incredible. And I think in a lot of years, my mind would have probably not just been made up for Genty to be number one on my ballot, like at the end of conference championship weekend. I think in a lot of years, I would have had Genty at number one before conference championship weekend. 2 years ago, when Caleb Williams won it, that was my first time voting. I would have had Genty ahead of Caleb Williams. I would have. That's unfortunately not how it works. And
Connor, a famous Caleb Williams hater as well.
As you know,
he's a Bears fan. That's the joke there. So that's actually a partiality there.
Yeah, and like, look, last year with Jaden, I probably still would have gone with Jaden, but it would have been really tough. And I think I would have gone back and forth just like I kind of did with this. Ultimately, though, I had Travis Hunter 1. I had Ashton Genty 2. We're going to get into who I had at 3 because I almost feel like that kind of deserves a separate discussion, especially with how close it played out with these two, with, again, this being the closest margin in 15 years. For what it's worth, I will not push back on anyone who had Ashton Genty at 1. Okay? No argument whatsoever. That is perfectly fine. That is not a decision that deserves any sort of criticism from me. And I will not pretend that it is some slap in the face to Travis Hunter to have Ashton Genty at number 1. Me pushing back on that would be a slap in the face to Genty. So I refuse to do that. Okay? I absolutely will not. The only thing, and I mean the only thing that bothered me throughout this whole process, and I'm doing everything I can to try not tip my hand, is to say like, all right, this is kind of how I feel like I'm leaning, although I wasn't decided on anything until, that Sunday. The only thing that really kind of bothered me throughout this entire process was the people who suggested that Travis Hunter was just a media creation and he was only getting this consideration because he played a lot of snaps. I hated that. It's one of the most like disrespectful things I've ever heard. And I don't have a dog in this fight. Coming into this, okay, I drafted Travis Hunter in our non-quarterback Heisman draft. Like, who cares? That's not a dog in the fight. This man won the Bednarik Award and he won the Bolitnikoff in the same year. Okay, if he's just logging snaps and doing nothing else, that does not happen. And for what it's worth, it's a weird year for the Bolitnikoff, the way that it shook out. I still would have had no problem with Trey Harris winning the Bolitnikoff. Mm-hmm. I mean, just because of the impact.
We're aligned on that, and it feels like we're alone, but we're right. I'm going to be honest with you. And the way I think about like MVP awards is, I think, different than most of America. But like I've talked about this on here before. When an MVP gets hurt and their team gets worse, that's a case for your MVP. Because if a guy stays healthy all year and his team's good all year, you don't know what's causing that. But when a guy goes down like Trey Harris or like Jalen Hurts was a good example a couple years ago, where it's like, this team sucks without him, actually.
Peyton Manning, 2011 Colts, most valuable player. The year that the Colts did not have Peyton Manning. Yeah, Trust me, I was there for every one of those home games. I interned with the team that year. It was not fun. This is a weird year for that whole discussion. So I'm not going to pretend like it's a slam dunk. Travis Hunter should have won the Bolitnikoff Award. We're not going to do that. But the people saying he was mid at 2 positions have lost their minds.
I have never, and you can keep me honest here, I've never done a, you never put your hand in the dirt style argument here. The people that think that like, well, he just played every snap. Have you tried it? Like, I couldn't imagine it. And let me just give one more example. Here's the deal. He's playing for Deion Sanders every day. So like last year when a rival safety just decided to harpoon him while he was playing defense, that was a possibility on every play. And why I didn't touch him in the draft, because I thought that somebody would take him out. Y'all were slightly right about Deion Sanders and this team was going to implode. The concept of someone staying healthy and playing 2 ways for Deion Sanders, Colorado, that 2 years ago had 1 win, is the most insane thing I've ever seen. And to think like, oh, well, he just played less. That's the point, brother.
Hate it. I'll make the argument without the snaps. Okay, let's start with the receiving, and not just the fact that he was the first player since at least 1976 to have at least 500 receiving yards and 4 interceptions in the same season. That, according to ESPN. Travis Hunter was 6th in FBS in receiving yards. He was 3rd among core 4 players in receiving. He had more receiving touchdowns than any core 4 player. He had at least 89 receiving yards in 9 of 12 games. And if you want to leave out the part about him having 8 receiving touchdowns in the second half and overtime, go ahead. That's fine. By the way, no FBS player had more. So the whole like, he's not really clutch. I would definitely push back on that. He's not even worth comparing to Charles Woodson because Charles Woodson had an average of 1 catch for 21 yards per game. If
that
you
was
want
PR. Let's just be honest about Charles Woodson.
That
was some special teams and some PR on offense.
It was a gimmick. And I love Charles Woodson. I wore a Raiders Charles Woodson jersey pretty much like once a week during middle school. I love that guy. Okay. So no, like I'm not here to hate on that. But if you're saying, well, this is just that all over again. No, it's not. And it's not even the Champ Bailey thing. Champ Bailey was the best to do it in that respect as a two-way guy before Hunter. But Hunter had 408 more receiving yards and 9 more receiving touchdowns as the guy that everybody and their mother knows is getting the football in those key spots. Nobody in America had a better quarterback rating when targeted than Travis Hunter. And I mean that on the receiver side. It's like when his quarterback's targeting him, quarterback rating of like 140, that's insane. If you want to debate whether or not he should have won the Biletnikoff, all right, fine, but just don't do the thing where you tell me like, oh, T-Mac or like T-Mac had 2 months without a touchdown. All right. Like after he went off against New Mexico in the opener. And Nick Nash, if you're arguing for him, you're arguing for a box score. And if you don't realize what I'm talking about with that, go look up the post-September numbers. That's a bit ridiculous. That's why Trey Harris, in my opinion, had a better case than those guys. Jeremiah Smith could have been part of that as well. But we don't need to dig into that.
Was so goofy. I hate to cut you off, but I've just made a Manalytics point, and now I'm going to go the other way and say I found myself agreeing with a PFF guy for the first time in a long time, which is like one of the guys like
Max Chadwick.
I forgot which one it was. I almost want to say it was like Renner or something, but they were like, oh, well, you know
not
what?
A PFF anymore. Let the record show. Yeah.
So it doesn't count. There you go. 0 PFF. Anyway, so point being, they were like, hey, like against like, FBS teams, like, and then somebody like got them and were like, well, actually, Kennesaw State moved up. Shut up. Like, it's the point. It's like, dude, shut up. Like, yeah, okay, the whole point is the competition here. And saying that one team moved up from like FCS like this year technically doesn't change anything about that point.
Agreed. And again, like, this isn't the Heisman is separate from who's the best receiver in the sport. Just the fact that Travis Hunter is part of that discussion is not an accident. I just showed you exactly why, based on not media narrative, but actual real numbers. The best player in the sport, in my opinion, was Travis Hunter. And the guy did all of that at receiver and then turned around right across from everyone else's best receiver and said, I got this. Let me take that guy. I'm going to lock him down. We already have the interception stats, 4 interceptions. But consider that he had 4 interceptions when he was only thrown at 38 times. That's insane. And by the way, 11 pass breakups. Quarterbacks completed just 58% of passes when targeting him. He only allowed 1 touchdown all year. Top PFF coverage grade among all FBS corners. Take that for what it is. If you're not a PFF fan, that's fine. He also allowed an FBS best 6 first downs. That's FBS best is in FBS fewest. 6 first downs this man allowed all year. 91 yak yards. And like all the people are like, he doesn't really want to tackle. Did you see the end of the Baylor game? Did you see how they won that game with Travis Hunter making a tackle on the goal line to force a fumble to give Colorado a win that helped them get to 9 wins, a program that only had 1 season with 6 wins in the last 16 years, and they went 9-3, a team that I'm like, are they going to win 3 games this year? I don't know. Travis Hunter was awesome. He was awesome, and I will not lose any sleep over putting him at number 1 on my ballot because I just think it's so unique what he did. And if you say like, you're just falling for the novelty of it, this is unique, this is so special. It is unique. It is special. And if you don't think it's unique,
that's what the Heisman's for, brother. Congrats. You figured me out.
If you think this is just going to become like the norm, tell me then why coaches who have been coaching in football for so long haven't ever been able to actually do this, because we've seen freakish 5-star athletes in this sport, and we've seen desperate coaches with freakish 5-star athletes on their teams in this sport. Travis Hunter's 101. Okay. There's no doubt about it. And the guy is awesome. And if you spent your entire year hating on him, that's a you issue. And I'm sorry, but I liked watching him play football, and I made it a point to watch him play football on YouTube TV. I would do the multi-view with him. I do the multi-view for a lot of these guys. And he just jumps off the screen every single time you watch him.
Yes, I agree. And I want to be so clear. This is my favorite Heisman race in, a long, long time. And notice, I haven't said a single thing negative about Ashton Genty because I think he's an amazing player. And to your point, I think if he's first, my favorite piece of football media this year might have been that fan cam with him and Sabrina Carpenter, where like they show them like standing like completely at like T-pose and then they just take off. The way that guy runs the football is so violent and awesome, and I loved watching him play. Of course, like I always talk about the media landscape where we got to put people against each other. Suddenly, all these people are. Go ahead, were you about to say something?
No, I'm gonna pick you. Like I agree with you. The negativity with him. There's one negative thing you can say about Ashton Genty. Can I just say it?
Go ahead.
He was one of the best 21st century running backs we've had. Okay, I will not argue against that. He was unreal against Oregon. 192 rushing yards in that game. Only his 7th best rushing day of the season, which is insane. That's what he averaged, 192. But just because he did it against Oregon doesn't mean the rest of the schedule then becomes Oregon. He still did it against a Mountain West schedule. And that's the only negative thing I can possibly say about him. Would he have done it against a Big 12 schedule, an SEC schedule, a Big 10 schedule? I think he absolutely could have. Would it have been more difficult? Yes. So I can't just treat those numbers the same exact way that I would have if it were against one of those power conferences. And that's just a knock against his conference. It's not even a knock against Ashton Genty. And I love that he stayed at Boise State. And I think that there is going to be so much to be said for that and for building a legacy and what that means to guys who decide ultimately that's what they want to do. But that's it. Well, that's the only real negative that I could come up with against Ashton Genty. And I feel bad even listing that as a negative.
And you know what we were essentially saying, and you said it at the end there, was that we're punishing him for not entering the transfer portal. Which if you boomer writers are out there talking about, the sport broken, this isn't the sport I grew up with. Well, you need to reward this guy for not leaving Boise State, because to your point, if you were in Oregon, it could have gone differently. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I think these are two amazing, unique candidates. I think, I love them both equally, as I would say. You vote on it, and you got to pick one, and I get that. I will say, to go off of that point, I understand the vitriol because, again, it's the market economy, it's the take economy. But like a lot of y'all became part-time potato farmers that I didn't know. So congratulations. A lot of y'all became big Boise State fans for the first time. That was good to see y'all out there. But yeah, I will say this just to bring it all the way back around. If you guys have consumed any football media in your life, pretty much, you're talking Friday Night Lights. I remember this at Last Chance U. If you've ever listened to Kirby Smart or Nick Saban or Dan Lanning talk, you will find the answer of the question of why has no one done this before. The goal of every physical football team is to make your opponent quit. And when you have a guy on the field who is leading the team in these big receiving categories and running all these routes, and he's also playing defensive back, you can pick on him. And the fact that every offensive coordinator that saw them was like, what we don't need to do? Go get some like shifty white guy in the slot against Travis Hunter and just target him 10 times and see if he gets tired. Because he didn't get tired. And so that's the thing. When you say, low amount of targets, great grade, it's like, yeah. And the offensive coordinators saw that guy on the other side of the field, and it wasn't hands on hips. It wasn't guys running out of juice. It was, we're scared of that guy.
Counterpoint, though, he didn't cover the slot hardly ever. So they were obviously scared. He can't play slot corner. If you can't play slot corner, did he play any snaps at linebacker? Did he line up in the box? Was he rushing off the edge? How many sacks did he have?
For Travis Hunter, until he starts playing special teams, all right.
Like, some of these arguments against him are just the silliest things I've ever heard. Like, if that guy wasn't good at this, don't you think offensive minds would figure that out and know? Especially in a conference that coming into this year, everybody was looking around going, Big 12 have like the best quarterbacks in college football. SEC had a lot of prestige at quarterback coming into this year as well, obviously. But you could have made a real case that the Big 12 had just the best conference with quarterbacks. And you probably could have found some guys to expose him if he were just a creation, a hype thing. And I found it maddening to listen to these people. I didn't engage with these people when they would come out and say this, but I'm just like, I feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for you if that's your perspective. If you want to hate on Deion, if you want to hate on Shador, like by all means, but to have a Travis Hunter beef is just weird. And I hope people that had that mindset watched him on Saturday night and watched how genuine he was and watched the way that he came across and watched just how magnetic of a personality he is. And I hope they felt a little bit bad for kind of like carrying that out, because it just like you can love Ashton Genty and still think Travis Hunter's awesome. It's fine. But and again, not pushing back on Genty at 1, but it was just so strange to see this army, this anti-Hunter army come out in full force.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things about us working together is I think we are together a pretty good, litmus test, because I'm a little bit of a rule bender. You're for sure like a rule follower. I'm a little bit of a hater. You're like a sport fan. So if we're both aligned on something and think that everyone is losing their marbles and they're all just being irrational, one of us, like, okay, good example is like the faking injuries thing. It bothers me, but that's like one of your pet issues. And I'm like, you're right about that. That represents a good amount of people. If you like the sport of college football and you don't like Travis Hunter because of Deion Sanders, go take a cold shower. Like literally, why are you here? Because again, we're talking about a guy who in Ashton Genty who didn't enter the transfer portal. We're talking about a guy in Colorado that Deion promised all these ridiculous, WWE style things. This guy's going to lead us in receiving. He's going to be the best corner in America. And again, if we get lost in the argument of, well, he wasn't the number 1 PFF corner, but he wasn't the number 1 receiver. Yeah, he was like top 5 or top 10 in both. And that in itself is enough of a case to make him a top 10 special player, conservatively we've ever seen in our lives. Enjoy it.
Yeah. How about the fact that all these Heisman finalists didn't start off at power conference schools? A note that I should have brought up the other day, and for whatever reason, you just kind of forget about it with Travis Hunter and the fact that he starts his career at Jackson State, the signing day flip heard around the world, flipping from Florida State to Jackson State, and this move that, look, it didn't necessarily have this chain reaction of all this. And that was kind of my takeaway that day is like, guys, I don't think we're about to see the number 1 recruit in the country just start going to HBCUs. With all due respect to HBCUs, they just simply don't have the resources in this day and age of NIL. It took a one-of-one situation. It took a Deion Sanders type person at a place like that in order for that to be able to happen. And obviously Travis Hunter has been right to follow Deion at every step of the way. And this guy has set himself up to be able to win the Heisman Trophy. And to now, look, if he's not a top 3 pick, it'll be stunning. It'll be probably because of an injury. And I would expect, maybe there's going to be 2 quarterbacks ahead of him with Cam Ward and then his teammate Shedeur potentially going ahead of him. But yeah, I loved getting to see him celebrate it. I loved, all of Saturday night. It was really, really fun. Will, can we talk about this 3rd spot here? Because I went back and forth a lot on this one.
Yes, and I do want to say really quick, and that actually dovetails to a point I didn't think I was going to be able to make. But what's so interesting is, we saw this trend for a while, right? And I don't want to combine too many things here, so just hear me out, right? Which is that it felt like for a while it was almost like the West Coast time zone, like after the USC Heisman winners are kind of over and over again in the early 2000s. And this is one of the funniest reference materials I have pulled up in my other browsers, which is map of the United States. I want to make sure I don't miss a state here. But if you look at these last 2 Heisman races, which have both been the 2 kind of closest that I can remember as an adult. Actually, if you look at it, let me just triple check my math here. Yeah, so Travis Hunter actually got more first place votes than Jaden Daniels did last year. And that's because of the strong 3rd place, which you're going to get to. And I will first quickly make the point of the West Coast vote was kind of split last year. We talked about that. You had 2 Pac-12 quarterbacks in Bo Nix and Michael Penix, and then your SEC quarterback. And those West Coast voters are kind of split on those 2 guys, leading Jaden Daniels to get fewer first place votes. But because of that strong 3rd place last year, this year becomes a kind of a technically closer race. So that was all I was going to say there, just kind of in bringing it all together.
Very unique. Yeah, it was. And I think there was so much variance with that 3rd spot of who you're going to put on the ballot. So here's kind of my thought process with this, at least as it got down to conference championship weekend. I'm not going to take you into what I was thinking about in week 8 or something like that. But at one point I thought, if I watch this Big Ten championship wherein a number 1 seed could be at stake, and again, this is an individual award, so that's not everything, but it's at least part of it. But if I watch this Big Ten championship and it's pretty clear that Tyler Warren is the best player on the field in a Penn State win, that would be my guy for 3rd. That would have been the 3rd guy on my ballot. And it would have felt weird to do that because I didn't put Bowers on my ballot in the 2 years that I've had a vote. He was hurt last year, and if you go back 2 years ago, he hadn't hit 800 receiving yards yet. He exploded in the playoff, obviously, but it wasn't like some slam dunk thing that, oh my God, that guy should absolutely be number 3. And I thought Stetson was so good in those big time matchups. That's ultimately why he got my number 3 spot, even though I would agree Bowers ends up being the best player on that team. Also could have considered Bryson Daly, a guy that a lot of people are still learning his story and the Army quarterback. I really
He's got a golf name.
Yeah, it's a big time golf name. You're exactly right. It is like a golf AI name. It very much is. You would not think Army quarterback for that name. You just wouldn't. Would have probably had that number 3 spot if it could have just been a competitive game against Notre Dame. And so it was a little bit tough to kind of see the way that played out. Dylan Sampson was in consideration for me. He really was. Remember when I said in the preview pod last week that we did that I thought it was going to be the first year that the SEC failed to have someone finish in the top 10 of the Heisman voting since 2005. That ends up happening. I don't think it should have happened. I think Dylan Sampson should have finished in the top 10. If I had 10 spots on a ballot, if I had 5 spots on a ballot, I think Dylan Sampson would have gotten one of them. I did not put him as my number 3 guy because of the fumbling issues that he had in the latter half of the season. Lost a fumble in 4 of his final 6 games, and it was a little bit tough to sit here and be like, yeah, you know what? This is a guy that deserves to be number 3 when I know how critical some of those fumbles were. And he was still obviously a monumental part of Tennessee SEC Player of the Year, but I still just couldn't quite get there for that number 3 spot and the impact that he had. Also loved Dylan Gabriel. Loved how, as I talked about the other day, how clutch he's been this year. And I love the fact that it's not just, oh my God, he had like 43 touchdown passes and like 4 picks, but he was picked off 3 times in the all-important game against Ohio State. It was not that type of year for Dylan Gabriel. If anything, he probably could have used a little more stat padding, but Oregon was a bit too dominant kind of in some of those big time and some of like the post-September games probably for him to have that type of season. And I also was kind of wondering, am I defaulting too much to the logic of like, oh, it's the quarterback on the best team while ignoring all the great circumstances he has around him? And how much is that playing a factor in terms of his individual impact? And I don't want to do the thing of like, how many guys could have led Oregon to this undefeated start? But those are the types of things that you wonder about when you're talking about an individual award like this.
Well, let me ask you this question. Were you more or less impressed as a 2-time Heisman voter, like Bo Nix or Dylan Gabriel? Who do you think had a better season?
Great question. I think I'd lean slightly Bo Nix. But maybe, you know what? Maybe I wouldn't. Because I do really think that Gabriel in some of these big time moments was just everything you could have hoped for. Like even I was watching that Wisconsin game too, and the throw that he makes on the move, rolling out to his left when they just can't get anything going all day, and that throw kind of puts it away. And that's the exact type of throw that is not Heupel scheme. It's not necessarily Will Stein scheme or anything like that. That is a guy that has played a ton of football, that has ice water in his veins at those moments, that at this stage of his career has built himself up to be able to have the confidence to fire that throw in there and get that big time conversion. I might have gone Gabriel. I think I just talked myself into it because of how good he was in those big time games, how good he was against Ohio State. And while Bo Nix was still obviously awesome, they still had those 2 games against Washington wherein he ends up losing those. He ends up getting outplayed by Michael Penix. But it's a great question. It's a great question that I think you could present a lot of different arguments for.
You know what's so weird about it too is that we imagine Bo Nix as like this stocky mobile quarterback, which is what we're seeing in the NFL under Sean Payton. It's a slight margin, but Dylan Gabriel, who no one would describe as mobile, actually had 1 more rushing touchdown than him. Now the passing stats are really gaudy for Nix. I think they were kind of cheesing a la how we all play in NCAA. Shout out to Dan Lanning, who's one of the younger coaches who grew up cheesing video games. I could relate to him in that way, where you're beating a team by a lot, you want to get some extra yards for your quarterback. I don't know. But I personally think Dylan Gabriel is a better passer than Bo Nix.
Definitely.
But I think maybe Bo Nix is a better quarterback because of the mobility.
Yes.
We didn't get to see that last year. That's what's so weird about them. And I don't think it's a bad idea because Bo Nix played so well last year. So just 2 very different players. But I'm right there with you in that Oregon seems to be a fixture in whatever conference, right? We made the hype about Texas. We got to do the same thing for Oregon for, losing the Pac-12 last year and then winning the Big Ten this year. So, yeah, I think hate to say it, man, but if you're a receiver, you can get that Phil Knight money. Seems like whoever they put behind center at Oregon is going to be pretty good for the foreseeable future.
It's not a bad way to go. Pretty lucrative if you're a quarterback that is transferring, and yeah, that's going to continue to be a fascinating vacancy when you've seen two guys with very different backgrounds come in and have just so much success there.
Real quick, too, let's just laugh at Ohio State really quick because we all set the expectations going into the year. They don't have a player in the top 10, but you know who does?
Number 10, Kyle McCord, 10th in the Heisman voting. If you had told an Ohio State fan at this time last year, hey, Kyle McCord is going to go to a power conference school. He is going to have an impact on the playoff, not be in the playoff, but have a significant impact on the playoff. And he's going to finish higher in the Heisman voting than anybody in your $20 million roster. They would have all thrown up in their mouths. No doubt whatsoever. Speaking of Kyle McCord, the guy that he beat in the regular season finale, Cam Ward, that's the guy that I almost had. I almost pulled the trigger on putting Cam Ward at number 3. I think you can make a real case, as I said the other day, best quarterback that Miami's had since Vinny Testaverde, probably even better. It really, like, when you consider the surroundings, and I know the surroundings impacted those losses down the stretch, and the defense, which was just a train wreck, and it sucks that Cam Ward had to be subjected to that. I'm not saying that if they're undefeated, he absolutely goes to New York. I'm not just saying that. But I do wonder if with some of the risks that he liked to take and some of the risks that he probably felt like he had to take, if at points there were moments where he was like, all right, I can't overcome this. This is too much pressure. I mean, moments where he did, the Cal game was unreal. His comeback, he could do no wrong down the stretch in that game. But you kind of wonder, was there someone that had an even greater impact on his team being able to get over that hump this year? And I thought there was. And it came down to just that. There was one guy in discussion for that number 3 spot that had just a slightly greater impact in my mind than Cam Ward, who maybe I was factoring in the Miami context of it a little bit too much as opposed to just who he was in relation to the rest of everyone else in college football. So do you know who I had at 3?
Who?
I had Cam Scadaboo at number 3.
Heck yeah, bro.
I love me some Cam Scadaboo.
Let's go.
I had no issue. Like, I will sleep well knowing that I had him at 3. A couple of years ago, I really went back and forth, and I felt kind of uneasy about the fact that I had Stetson on there instead of Hendon Hooker. And I like, even afterwards, I felt kind of sheepish about that. And there were definitely days where I'm like, why didn't I just put Hendon Hooker at 3? That was my guy. I'm going to sleep well knowing that Cam Scadaboo, I did everything. I mean, outside of putting him at 1 or something like that. I wanted that guy to be in New York, and it's a bummer that he wasn't. But the Big 12 championship clinched it for me. It clinched it. He was in that discussion. All of these guys were kind of right there for me. But then you watch how he plays in these moments. I don't know that I've ever said this sentence on these airwaves, but I think it applies to Cam Scadaboo. That guy inspires people with how hard he runs. Mm-hmm. Seriously. We were watching the Big 12 championship with Candler, his fiance, and Perry. And I think it was either Candler or Candler's fiance, who Candler's fiance knows ball very, very well. And she's watching Cam Scadaboo and is like, that's Marshawn Lynch. This guy is just beast mode all the time. Mm-hmm. And I love that comp because that's one of the best, maybe the best comp that I've heard from him since he's been on my radar. And this is a great example of kind of like why I love having this in the back of my mind, watching games throughout the regular season and not just like cramming at the last second, being like, oh, hey, let me figure out, who's got the most rushing yards, who's got the most passing touch, whatever. Remember when Mississippi State and Arizona State played back in week 2, and it was a game that started, I think, at 10:30 on the East Coast? I stayed up late, and I was knocking on some notes for the pod and finishing up some writing. And I would look up every 5 minutes, it felt like, and be like, who is that guy? Mississippi State cannot tackle him. He is just running over dudes. And I know Mississippi State struggled against the run this year, but it played against so many other teams. Cam Scadaboo had 297 scrimmage yards that night. I remembered it being a lot. I didn't remember it being quite that much. Yeah, he was unbelievable. And at that time, no, I did not expect to be like, yeah, in a few months, I'm going to have Cam Scadaboo as one of my 3 spots on my ballot. But you just file stuff away. And then if a guy's starting to kind of take off, you're like, all right, now I could really dial in to his games. On the multi-view, I'm going to put on that Arizona State game. I want to see how they're playing against BYU. I want to see how Cam Scadaboo is showing up in these big-time moments for an Arizona State team that suddenly has playoff life. What? They can win the Big 12? So for a lot of these guys, that's what I've been doing. And I can point to the numbers with Scadaboo, like how he ended up with over 2,000 scrimmage yards in the regular season. He had 170 more scrimmage yards in conference play than any Core 4 player. Among Core 4 backs, he was second in receiving yards. All that stuff's great. That's all well and good. But that is a man that every single time he gets the football, he looks like he is trying to put an entire team on his back while running through an entire team. He's unbelievable. He's just the epitome of what I would want every time I turn around and hand off the football to someone. At one point on Saturday during the closing minutes of the SEC Championship, I found Hester in the press box at Mercedes-Benz. Hester's sitting down, and that's Hester just likes watching football, and he's probably thinking about this process himself, and he's just in a daze. And he's like, "Sorry, I'm just in a trance watching Cam Scadaboo." Like, I don't blame you. I don't blame you, because that was me a half hour earlier. If that doesn't tell you how inspiring that guy is, I don't know what does. He elevated that Arizona State team, and they're in this playoff field because of him. Yes, Sam Levitt, big part of that. Cam Scadaboo, man. Love me some Cam Scadaboo. Number 3 on my ballot.
Listen, now that you've mentioned Hester, I have to make the joke, just like Marshall Mathers and Hester inspired me. Cam Scadaboo, he's inspired. No, but honestly, bro, if you look at his last, like the form, as they'd call it, his last 5 games, man, yeah, because he has an extra couple receiving touchdowns in here. 3 tutties, 3 tutties, 3 tutties. No tutties against K-State, but another 3 tutties, 2 of them receiving. Yeah, so I mean, that end of the season to him is just a tank. And like the Lynch comp, a lot of people say, oh, it's ridiculous. No, dude, watch this guy play football. Like, watch this guy play football. It's so crazy. And maybe it's because it's a place like Arizona State. Maybe it's because they came in late, to your point. Like, Colorado kind of in pole position for that championship. They kind of got their chain snatched in a couple of ways, right? Didn't hurt Hunter, helped Scadaboo. Would love to see that. So, yeah, I love that vote, man. If we're talking about the best or most impactful players, this guy is a case because last year this team was trash. This year they're a conference champion. Not trash. It was year 1 under him. A couple years ago they were trash. A couple years ago they had Herm Edwards. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? A couple years ago they were really trash. So point being, like, in terms of variance and how much one guy can affect his roster, watch this guy run and think, yeah, punting here would really be good for them. They would still.
It's like a guy that every time he runs, he thinks about the fact that Arizona State was picked to finish last in the Big 12, and he wants to just run through everyone who had that thought and make them think something else. That's
the real F. Bobby Boucher right there. That's that dude runs angry, yes, bro.
The angriest of runs. Shout out Kyle Brandt. He will have an angry run shirt for Cam Scadaboo in the very near future when that guy hears his name called in the NFL draft. So
Dan Campbell somewhere licking his chops for
Dan Campbell's thinking to himself like, oh man, Dave Montgomery just went down, maybe season-ending injury. Can I call up Cam Scadaboo and just have him on the sideline? Just kind of
don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. He's fine. So yeah, that's my ballot. Scadaboo at 3, Genty at 2, Hunter at 1. No quarterbacks for your boy. I'm not anti-quarterback. Just kind of worked out that way. Don't know that I'm going to have a lot of years like that without a quarterback on the ballot, but yeah, that's kind of how it broke down. And no regrets whatsoever. I feel good about it.
Yeah, amazing Heisman race. I think we've said it all. I think that this was very cool. It was the good things about the 12-team playoff where it comes to, okay, you got a G5 team that their games matter. You have guys not entering the portal, guys sticking to their commitments, and again, like from Travis Hunter's situation, again, like you said, he came from Jackson State. So yeah, I think this is lots of cool things. There's not a bad guy. There's not a guy that I would have. Here you go. And one thing I do want to say really quick that I didn't say, actually, this is the first time in my life I think I've ever felt bad for Miami. I will say that really quick, which is that every time Miami steps on a rake, I laugh at them over and over and over again, going all the way back to the Nevin Shapiro stuff, going all the way back to the third floor crew. I'm sitting here going, Cam Ward, I mean, this guy.
Seventh floor crew.
You're so right. Wow. With my boy.
What's your name, G-Reg?
You know what I do. You know what G-Reg does. Anyway, so point being, good one, yeah, but point being, this is the first time I've ever felt like Miami, really, I'm like, dang, you guys were, I don't have a gripe with it because I get it. I think it's technically the right decision, but the way, like, watching Cam Ward was really special this year, and it stinks that their defense collapsed down the stretch. It stinks that they're in these situations. What's weird about Ward is you'd say, oh, I don't like the picks. So you look back, he has 7 picks. It was just the fact that his offense put everything on him, which, again, is not really what you're supposed to do, especially with a quarterback that's not super mobile. We've seen it work a couple of times with guys that are. But point being, I actually legitimately feel bad for Miami fans because their guy, most of the year, was in pole position for the Heisman. Most of the year, they were in the top 10, top 5 spot, and none of that came to fruition. And I actually feel like they kind of got bleeped. So this is the first time Miami, welcome to college football, where it's not just hope and it all blows up in the first month of the year. It's like, wow, sometimes you were a pretty good team and it didn't go anywhere. This is crazy.
I didn't hear a word you just said. I was just thinking of 7-4 crew and bopping in my head. Sorry.
Every time I see G-Reg on the broadcast, I think of him. I'm so glad you shouted that out. Anyway.
I had a Greg Olsen Bears jersey that I wore for years. And every once in a while, I get someone that come up to me in high school or something like that, be like, G-Reg, 7-4 crew. Mm-hmm. Or that had to be a college. That was a college thing. Definitely a college thing, not a high school thing as much. All right. Gasparilla Bowl, Florida. Sure. 13.5-point favorite against Tulane. Love it. Love it. I don't do the full bowl names, and I'm sure the corporate sponsors wouldn't exactly love that. I just made a decision a few years ago. I got to cut it off at some point.
They're not paying you. That's what I say.
They're not paying me. I can't. When I go up, hopefully, to the pearly gates one day, and I look back at the time that I wish I could have back, saying the full extended bowl names, that would be time that I'd want back. So I'm just going to make the decision now. Just not going to happen. All right. Gasparilla Bowl. Over under, Will. 2.5 references to this being a home game for Florida. Gainesville to Tampa. It's not a bike ride, but it's not a plane ride. 2-hour trip. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a bike ride if you're a psycho and into that sort of thing. Florida fans will be represented well. If you're the ultimate good vibes team of the offseason, you have a big crowd on hand for your bowl game, no matter what it is, and you win your bowl game. So a ton riding on this for the Gators, as I'm sure they will acknowledge in any sort of post-game celebration if that comes to fruition. Not sure what the mobility will be for DJ Lagway compared to him down the stretch, but as we know, he won 3 in a row with an apparatus on his leg, so not sure that it matters a whole lot.
He's just going to he's going to be in a wheelchair back there just throwing bombs 70 yards. Nobody can cover anybody. He's so fun, dude.
NFL draft film is just DJ Lagway sitting in a wheelchair. This guy from a seated wheelchair threw it 65 yards on a line. You've got to see this.
That's some hopium. This guy really got to work on the arm angles this year. Like, he was really having to work with some stuff, and he could zip it, dude.
Craftier than ever. Like an old man at the gym, just figures things out. It's like, all right, I'm going to have to get real crafty. We're going to have to hit from 16, 17 feet. Oh, little bunny hook. Oh, That's in the bag. DJ Lagway's got a lot in the bag after just his true freshman season. What matters so much more than probably the mobility of DJ Lagway is the fact that this defense has been tremendous. And it's a defense that's not going to see Tulane starting quarterback because Darian Mensah is off to Duke. We found that out last week. That means John Summerall's squad is expected to start former Oregon transfer, former big-time recruit, Ty Thompson. Mm-hmm. First career start for him. Huge opportunity. It really is. That's a bit of a wild card, and maybe we're going to have some moments in this game where they say on the broadcast, oh, that's why he was a big-time recruit back in 2021, and they won't acknowledge the fact that it's his 4th season of college football, and if you were that ready to be the guy, you probably would have gotten an opportunity at some point. But again, it is a bit of a wild card. John Summerall, also a bit of a wild card, even with a bit of a depleted roster. One of the top, if you know ball, you know him guys in the sport. That used to be Willie Fritz, used to be the leader of that discussion. So maybe it's just a Tulane head coach sort of thing. I don't know. Kind of feels like it though. Like if you really cared about this coaching search, you'd know that Willie Fritz, that guy should be getting consideration. Now Willie Fritz is at Houston, so it's a different story. But I'm not crazy about how Tulane finished the regular season. I watched that Miami game on Thanksgiving night, or at least like the second half of it or something. That really got away from them. They kind of lacked defensive discipline. Pretty bad to lack defensive discipline when you face Army as well. Didn't go so well for Tulane that night. AAC championship ends up going to Army. Florida is suddenly a really bad team to be completely undisciplined against on both sides of the ball, I would argue, but especially trying to defend that Florida offense.
Because any play could be a touchdown when you got DJ Lagway.
I think it can. I really do. He'll throw it from a wheelchair. He doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to watch him again on Friday night. It's Friday afternoon, I should say. It's right before the playoff. What a perfect appetizer for the playoff. If I could just draw up this schedule, that would be it right there. Give me DJ Lagway being able to play in a Friday afternoon game, not necessarily, I've got to flip over, I've got to have it on the multi-view. No. Let me just be able to watch DJ Lagway with a little bit of extra time. I think DK and Badger, who have been money down the stretch, I think they're going to be awesome in this game. Last collegiate game for Elijah Badger. He is playing in this one. I think he has like one of those 150, 175-yard days, and Florida covers, wins big, 31-10. And if that happens, it's an 8-5 finish for Florida. Any Florida fan would have signed up for that. We've talked about how much our perspective of this team has changed with what they've done really in the latter half of the season. But I'll say it, Will. If Florida wins this game, ultimate off-season good vibes team, I think it belongs to Florida.
Yeah, I need to see, because I texted you about this, and I'm like, they need to do something in the portal, I feel. But I'm just objectively here. It looks like the biggest two guys they've lost to the portal have both gone to LSU, which is kind of weird. Like, they need to get Lagway some weapons, like, pretty, in my opinion, kind of bad. Like, I think they just need more guys to throw to.
They will.
Because we've been talking about it for so long. Like, last year it was like Pearsall and some dudes. Like, it's about depth at the receiver position. If you have a quarterback who can hit guys anywhere, because you get 4 receivers on the field, that fourth guy's open. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot more often than, dedicating the resources to your big number 1, 2 receiver. So I'm super interested by Florida's path. I kind of just wonder what Billy's cooking, because it feels like maybe their names have been in stuff, but I haven't really seen like the big.
Trey Wilson is going to be their biggest transfer addition. Mm-hmm. Trey Wilson basically had a lost season and was out this whole year. So him coming back is really important. He was expected to be their number 1 as a sophomore this year. So that's probably part of it. Losing back, I wish we could see a full season of Badger and Lagway, because those guys were really in sync together. But you're right. I think they will make some big time additions via the portal. That's an area that Florida is not really held back with being able to go after guys, and not just from Arizona State, like Badger and Ricky Pearsall, but elsewhere. So, yeah, I think that'll
also
be in the
UL.
cards. Say it again.
Also, Louisiana, ULL. No, but honestly, Billy's portal strategy has actually kind of been underrated. That's the thing. If you look at the individual players and how they played, Cyrus Thomas was really good. That's the name I haven't said in a minute. I hope I got it right. But
Osiris Torrance.
Osiris Torrance. There we go. And so thank you. You picked
I
up
love
on
how
that.
you just said that so fast. You just like breeze right through it.
Please tell me I'm right. Anyway, so yeah, no, but that guy mattered. And so point being, this is, I'm feeding into the hopium, Connor. I think let's look at the guys that come over, but his track record has actually been really good. And honestly, Montreal Johnson played well, stuff like that. So I think they need some weapons to be the good vibes team. But to your point, finally, Florida's in a position where they're on this end of this. We remember the last Gasparilla Bowl was after the Dan Mullen thing. They got beat by a very motivated UCF team when they didn't really care, because they didn't really know what it was like. It was just a different team that was in transition. They didn't care about that roster because they'd moved on to Billy. And so I think having one of these, Brian Kelly special bowl game victories that's the other team is kind of reeling, you have a better roster, so you just punch them in the mouth and get out of there real quick. That'll help you get to 9 games. That'll help you build some, or for Brian Kelly's perspective, or from Florida's perspective, get you to 8 games and feel this was an 8-5 season. Yeah, the first part was rough, but at the end of the year, we had this big win streak. So yeah, I think this is kind of a dream situation for Florida, where they hopefully don't have to try too hard. They hopefully don't have to get guys injured, for instance, and can kind of have some of the backups in against the Tulane team that their quarterback couldn't leave quick enough. If that happened at a Power 5 or P4 program, we would have Congress people mad about it. We would have Bills in Ohio if that happened at Ohio State, but we're not going to talk about it.
Mensa got some big time offers. No doubt about it. Mensa got some big time offers to be able to hit the portal. That guy was going to have a market. Yeah.
Right. But I'm saying that if he left Tulane, if he left Ohio State or something, the way that he left Tulane, it was committed the next day, there would be a federal investigation, but whatever, gets Tulane. So point being, you're kind of in a dream situation if you're Florida. So you want to show that physicality, you want to show off the arm with Lagway so you can get some of those portal guys hey, watch this. And so I think this is a great launching point for the next season for sure. And the schedule will certainly be easier next year, hopefully.
If we're thinking about what this can be for Florida, if they are able to win this game, There are cautionary tales of why we shouldn't assume that momentum season to season is real.
Mm-hmm.
Could it be 2016 Tennessee?
We already got one of those now.
Sorry, Florida fans, you don't want to hear that. You definitely don't want to hear that. Could it be 2022 Florida State with what they did down the stretch, and then obviously would it parlayed into in 23? Is that the type? I mean, Florida fans would take a 13-0 start to next season. Of course, they take that all day, every day. Of course, we have a different perspective of that now, looking back at it because of how 2024 played out.
Now we can both admire and laugh at them, so you guys can not discredit how good they were in 2023 because it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Just goes to show you a wide range of outcomes could be in store, but for Florida to just feel good at the end of the season, it's been 5 years since Florida was able to truly feel good at the end of a season, and that could be very much in the cards if they're able to take care of business against Tulane. All right, let's kick it to Gary Stokan. I always try and get a variety of perspectives on this show with the guests that we bring on, and obviously Gary's perspective, for those who've been listening for a long time or those who haven't, it's pretty unique, but also at the same time very important for college football and the landscape of the postseason, and all the different moving pieces that are involved. So we talked about some potential changes that could be coming, why Georgia isn't in the Peach Bowl. If you've been kind of wondering about that, we kind of ran through that and whether or not change could be in store for that, with the way that those top 4 teams are slotted. So great discussion with Gary Stokan. So here he is. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is the person who has actually been coming on this show longer than anybody. That's a fun fact. How about that? It is Peach Bowl CEO Gary Stokan. Gary, we've reached playoff week, which is awesome. And I know the Peach Bowl has a couple more weeks before we kind of figure out what exactly it will look like with the other half of this matchup. But has reality sunk in for you how different this new playoff system is with 12 teams, having the team host sites for the first round, and just everything feels like it is on a different timeline than anything I bet you've ever experienced?
That's a great point, Connor. First off, Merry Christmas. Thanks for having us. And I'm surprised you still have a show with having me on as your longest guest. It's been really interesting this year. As I tell my team every year, we have to continually improve. And this year, more so than ever, with the integration of the CFP 12-team playoff and all the meetings and time and effort that it's taken place, the documents, the strategies that have gone into this, and my team working with the other New Year's Six bowl games, as well as the CFP, to put forth this first iteration of the CFP playoff. It's been fun. It's been interesting. It's been a lot of work. And now, as I tell them, this is our game. This is the fun part of it, where we're actually able to host people. And, we'll miss certain things. We'll miss having the kids go to Martin Luther King Ebenezer Baptist Church or the College Football Hall of Fame or things like that took place during Bowl Week, our Battle for Bowl Week event, etc. But, as we've seen with viewership being up, attendance being up in college football, this 12-team playoff has really caught the interest of the nation in college football, which is great.
Yeah, it's just bizarre to think, you have a bowl game and you've had, a standard protocol of like, all right, 3 weeks of buildup. These are the activities that we're going to have both of these teams do. Here's how we're going to market it. Here's how this is going to work on the back end with us. And instead, Arizona State locked in, and then your other teams, Texas and Clemson, they'll be facing off in Austin this weekend. You guys will be there for it. And kind of, we were talking before we came on, getting to kind of present them with this reward of, hey, you earn the right to be able to play in this game. When you saw that was going to be essentially the play-in to get into the Peach Bowl, that it was going to be Texas and Clemson, 2 teams that have already played at Mercedes-Benz this year, was that a significant victory for you guys?
Well, it's ironic, we sat there and after the games were over, we said, okay, what's it look like? Then we sat there on Sunday morning. We didn't know what was going to happen. We see Arizona State is, looks like our seed. And then we see 5 and 12 with Clemson and Texas. And then we start thinking through it. Ironically enough, they both played in Mercedes-Benz. I I laugh because I tell Dabo Sweeney at the beginning of the year, and I told Kirby Smart, you guys want to play in Atlanta, in Dabo's case 3 times, once in the Aflac kickoff game, once in our Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, and once in the national championship. And Kirby 4 times because we host the SEC championship game in Atlanta as well. We'll miss him on his 3rd trip. He's got 2 in. We'll miss him. He's going to the Sugar Bowl, but he has a chance to come back in January in the case of Georgia. And then Clemson, obviously, if they win this game, this will be, their 2nd time, and then they'll have a chance, obviously, of playing in January in Atlanta. The great thing is for us, being in Atlanta, we're going to host all 3 of the CFP major events, the quarterfinal, the semi, and the national championship, basically in a calendar year. This year we'll host the quarterfinal on January 1st, and then January 20th, the national championship will be played in Atlanta. And then next year, January 9th, I think, we play the CFP semifinal game. So great time for Atlanta and the CFP.
What's that going to be like for you guys on Saturday? Like I said, you guys are going to be there at the Clemson-Texas game in the first round, but knowing that if that game gets lopsided, it's 28-7. It's kind of a different level of panic probably for one of those fan bases, like whoever's on the winning side of that. And they're going to try and start booking arrangements as soon as possible. And ticket sales, all of a sudden, you'll probably, and I'm sure you guys have data where you track all that stuff. You guys are probably going to see that spike once that looks like, all right, that result is kind of locked in. Is there anything you do on the back end to prepare for that? Like, how exactly does that work, knowing that this is entirely dependent on Saturday's result?
Yeah, and I give credit to a lot of the universities, their ticketing offices. The hay is pretty much in the barn. If Texas wins, they've sold their tickets. If Clemson wins, they've sold their tickets. So, that all has to be done in advance. Obviously, one of the unintended consequences and one of the things that concerns you is, are people going to be able to pay the prices for the travel? Because, the airlines use those algorithms and, they push the prices up when they know that people from Clemson are flying out of Greenville or Atlanta or Charlotte maybe to wherever. And, you have this game, you have the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, which in Clemson's case makes it a little easier because a lot of those people can drive. And then you've got a semifinal, you've got Christmas, and you got a championship game. So, God bless those people that are such great fans and support college football so well. But in the case of our game, we're sold out here with our tickets, and then both teams, Texas and Clemson, I believe, are sold out of theirs. So, we'll have a sellout, and they just have to prepare for their travel plans.
What's that like with resale stuff? Losing team, all of a sudden, they're probably hitting the secondary market with those tickets, or do you get those tickets back and get to redistribute them to like and split them up between both of the teams? Like, how does that work when you have 2 ticket allotments that at least half of them are going to essentially want to probably back out of those games? Like, do you have a normal, clean way to kind of make that happen to where it's not just the secondary market who gets to benefit from it?
Yeah, it's more on the individual schools. So in other words, in the case of Texas and Clemson, they've made they have relationships with their season ticket buyers who are buying tickets based on if they win. So in other words, they won't be charged, their credit cards if Clemson loses or Texas loses. They will be charged if they win, and so that's the way that works. Arizona State, obviously, they know what bowl they're coming to and when, and so they've made the appropriate charges to their season ticket holders as well. So, and then our tickets are sold just because people buy basically a one-game season ticket to our bowl game every year because they know we're going to get great games.
What's been the response of Arizona State fans so far? Because on one hand, it's hard to be less of a geographical match than Arizona State in Atlanta. It's not exactly a bike ride away, but at the same time, it's a massive alumni base, and they've got people all over the country, which is, I would imagine at this point, based on everything that I've seen from them, kind of appreciating how rare of a run this has been. So what's it kind of been like just in terms of the demand and the overall excitement for this game?
Well, really interesting. I've talked to, I think, every media person in the Valley out there this past couple of weeks since we've known Arizona State's going to be in. A few interesting stories. One was the last time the Arizona State played in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, or the Peach Bowl at that time, was our third bowl game back in 1970 when Frank Kush was number 8 in the country. And there were only 9 bowl games, I believe. And they couldn't get into the Orange, Sugar, Cotton, or Rose, the big bowls at that time. And the Peach Bowl reached out to them, brought them to Atlanta, and they played against North Carolina. They won 48-26, but it rained in the first quarter, snowed in the second quarter, or sleet in the second quarter, snowed in the third quarter, and iced in the fourth quarter. And the people in Arizona were sitting there saying, we're freezing here, but it's 80 degrees in Phoenix today. Why don't we start one of these bowl games? So based on, Arizona State not being able to get into a bowl game because they were ranked in the top 10 and couldn't find a home, they said, well, let's make a home for them in the future, number one. And number two, because we got good weather, this would work out there. And so the people from Phoenix started to meet with the people from Atlanta in the Peach Bowl. And out of that was created the Fiesta Bowl. So an interesting story there. I'll tell the other one, Bill Dooley was the coach of North Carolina. And John Swofford, the former commissioner of the ACC, was a safety on that team. And Arizona State was so fast that when you look at the game film, Swofford's playing so far back you can't even see him in the game film because their wide receivers just tore up North Carolina. But Vince Dooley was on the sideline because they didn't go to a bowl that game at Georgia, and he was supporting Bill, his brother. And he told me, he says, Gary, I was never so cold in my life. They were Bobby Dodd Stadium. And he said, I had to leave my brother. By the third quarter, I was so cold I couldn't stand it on the sidelines anymore. So a few interesting stories. But to answer your question, on the Arizona State side, imagine, here they are picked last in the Big 12. They not only win the Big 12, but they get a chance to play in the CFP playoff, and they get a bye. And so they're so excited. It's fun to see. It's part of college football that I've enjoyed, is seeing the fans and the team and the media, really get excited about the opportunity that lie ahead. So that's what sports is all about, just having the opportunity to compete. And Arizona State's earned that opportunity to compete in the quarterfinal of the CFP Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl.
And such a big part of that is Kenny Dillingham and his personality. It's so infectious. And, I've loved what he has been able to build in such a short time there. And obviously his roots in the Tempe area is certainly playing a part in the pride that he takes. And that's such a big reason why this Arizona State team has been so fun. I imagine, based on the stories that you just told, that Kenny Dillingham and his Arizona roots have not exactly clamored for an open roof at Mercedes-Benz or anything like that. If he did ask for that, though, is that something that you can grant? Does that have to be agreed upon for both parties? Is it like a higher seated thing could dictate something like that? Have you gotten any sort of sense of how that would work if all of a sudden you had a coach come in with a neutral site game and be like, hey, I would love to be able to, I think this would play better. And ironically enough, I think his team would actually embrace the cold a little bit more than some others would, Clemson and Texas, with the style that Arizona State plays. Has he made any sort of weird request like that?
No, he hasn't. I don't think that's Kenny's personality to make requests or demands. I think he's ready to play whoever, whenever, and that's kind of like their team. I mean, you got Kenny Dillingham back at his alma mater with the opportunity. You got Scadaboo and Levitt that are transfers that, hey, they've got an opportunity. And I think that's their mindset. They haven't asked about the roof. And, once we get the other team, we'll talk to CFP. It's kind of the only request I've ever had is Chris Peterson when Washington played Auburn in our Chick-fil-A kickoff game at the time, because the heat back then, Auburn practiced in that where Washington doesn't feel that heat and humidity in August. So that's the only request we've ever had. We'll take it under guidance as to what the weather is going to be like, and then, make a call. More than likely at 1:00, it'll be closed. And that's probably the fairest for both teams.
Do you get to make that call? Do you get to push that button like the Jim Irsay at Lucas Oil?
Yeah, we'll take into consideration, but it's under guidance with a lot of people. Obviously, it'll be discussions with CFP, with both athletic directors and coaches, and then Mercedes-Benz Stadium as well.
Curious what your take on this is, because the quarterfinal host sites like yourself are decided based on historic bowl relationships, and I kind of overlooked that part of the 12-team playoff. There's so much to figure out, and that was one of the things that kind of I didn't even really process, like the fact that Georgia, as the winner of the SEC championship, is actually playing in the Sugar Bowl and not all of a sudden getting the benefit of location like we'll see in the semifinal, like we've seen in the past with the semifinal. Because obviously if Georgia had it its way, it'd be playing at Mercedes-Benz, and it wouldn't necessarily, and it's the number 2 seed. Oregon would still be playing in the Rose Bowl. But, why can't we apply that same logic to this and have those top 4 seeds get even more incentive to be able to pick their location, instead of it kind of being, based on their location, but also kind of not, and just being more based on the conference?
Well, your foresight is very accurate. However, I think the commissioners will take that in consideration as they move forward with the next 2 years here, this year and next year, about what the iteration of the next CFP 12 team, or it's 14 or 16, whatever they decide for 2026 season. But we're still under the original contracts that we all signed. The New Year's Six Bowl signed in 2014, that goes through 2025 season, or games. So in this case, we knew that as quarterfinals, us, the Fiesta, were going to be at large, and we knew that the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl being quarterfinals, the Rose Bowl by contract would still get the Big Ten champ, and the Sugar Bowl would still get the higher ranked champ of the SEC or the Big 12, because we're still under contract this year and next year. And then in 26, it's up to the commissioners how they want to structure, the playoff, and who will all be involved, and, what teams, if there's ties to bowl games or not.
And the irony is that if Georgia had lost the SEC championship and then gotten the 5 seed or something like that, maybe that wouldn't have broken down like that because of Penn State. Although I guess that's kind of what we're talking about here. If Georgia had potentially gotten to be in that 5-4 matchup, they could have ended up playing at Mercedes-Benz. And it's just kind of weird the way that this is all set up.
I think it's a great point. There's so many learnings in this first go through of the CFP playoff, and I think the commissioners are going to take that into consideration. Do they go to automatic qualifiers? If you win the conference champion, do you get in, but you don't necessarily have a bye? Are we going to 14 teams or 16? There's so many learnings whenever you do anything the first time. And I know they're taking all that into consideration as they start to plan forward. CFP has their own thinkings with the 4 commissioners, and then each commissioner has their own thoughts. I mean, you just look at the SEC. By this spring, they've got to decide, are they going to 9 conference games? Is ESPN going to pay them more money to do that, number one? Number two, are they going to keep the rivalry games if they go to 9 conference games? Because you got Florida, Florida State, Kentucky, Louisville, Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia, Georgia Tech. That in that case would give those 10 teams or 10 games that are tough. And then lastly, they've met with the Big Ten. Are they going to do a Big Ten SEC kind of home and home? That would give you 11 tough games. And, they've got to feel out the CFP selection committee. Are they rewarding wins, or are they rewarding, strength of schedule, how all that works? So there's a lot of remuneration back there, and, SEC, Big Ten, ACC, and Big 12 that, we'll go into the process of figuring out what the next 12 team or 14 or 16 team playoff looks like.
You talk to athletic directors. I think we can all agree that as fun as it'll be to see these first round playoff games on college campuses, it's an entirely different conversation for what you deal with logistically. And a lot of the back end stuff of hotels and, oh, are we going to have enough staff, to be able to make this happen on a moment's notice when we don't necessarily know, 6, 7 months in advance that we're going to be hosting at this time and doing all of these different things for a huge crowd and, fan bases that are going to be traveling from out of town. Like, what exactly is all of this going to look like in a way that college football has never, ever done it before? What issues have you heard from athletic directors that you've talked to with some of these first round playoff games of having these games on college campuses? Because I know that's something that you kind of warn people about when you're like, hey, there's a reason why we have these games in big time cities and why, big New Year's Six Bowl, those sites aren't going away and why you guys have been, able to kind of stand the test of time, even as college football has continued to change.
Yeah, I think some of the concerns are, hotel space. I think probably some of the ADs that are not hosting the games are probably concerned about the 3,500 tickets that they get. I think that's a couple right off the bat that I can think of. I know a lot of ADs wanted the games on site in the first round. There's revenue involved. Obviously, there's a home field advantage involved. So it'll be interesting to see. My belief is that, the bowl games around the country, there are some great other bowl games besides the New Year's Six that could host these games. And so my thought was always to host them at all the bowl games. But, they wanted to try something on campus. And again, as I said earlier, with the current structure, they'll look at a lot of learnings from this first year of, games on site. What are they going to learn? And, they'll improve it from there. So, it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, when you're talking about Texas and Notre Dame and Ohio State and what's the other game?
SMU and Penn State.
Yeah, Penn State. I mean, they're used to having sellouts and large crowds and everything. The amount of travel, I think the CFP looked at it and said, okay, most conference games, teams get about 3,500 tickets, the visiting team. So they've dealt with hotels with that many people. So it'll be interesting to see the first round games. We're excited again to go to Austin and see the Clemson Texas game and know one of those teams are going to come play in our quarterfinal game. So, but again, I think the CFP, the ADs will, they'll have a manual of what went right, what things they can improve on, and then they'll take that into consideration for the next iteration.
Last one for you, and it's a question I'd like to ask you annually because I think perspective changes, and as we get more experience with the new things that are associated with college football, i.e. home games in the playoff, I think we are able to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. What other postseason changes would you advocate for in 2026 when this new contract is going to start, and we're probably going to have an expanded playoff? It's just a matter of what it's going to look like.
I think that probably amongst maybe 10 things or more that college football needs to get right and deal with and change. Not necessarily saying they're all bad, but, we've really got to look at the calendar and, I don't know the answer, but I know that we've got to look at the calendar and decide what we want to do with what makes sense with transfer portal and free agency and, bowl games and opting out and all the rest. Because, if you just brought somebody in who had no idea about what we were doing and said, here's the calendar of how college football works, they would wonder who put that together. And again, I still go back to where I think we still need a home office of college football. We need a commissioner. I look at the NFL. The NFL, those owners are billionaires. They think about football every day. And college football, we seem to, follow the NFL by 10 years. I mean, you look at this year, what are we doing? We're bringing iPads and green dots on helmets with communication.
It's like forever.
The NFL's been doing that for 10 years. You know, but no one is looking at college football every day and saying what we need to do to improve it. You watch, our kickoffs will change in the next 5 years because the NFL changed their kickoff. But we need to get back to being college athletics and getting kids opportunities for scholarship, getting them a degree and then getting them a job. And I saw some statistics where there's 1,500 kids in the transfer portal. You got teams like Marshall, opting out of a bowl game because they don't have a team now. But more than anything else, I worry about the statistics that I read where I think it's 20% of kids that transfer more than once are not getting their degrees. And that's not what college athletics is about. We seem to keep moving to an NFL light type of system with general managers, and the transfer portal is free agency, and that's not what college athletics is about. And let's stop pandering to the 2% of kids that are going to go pro, and let's worry about the 98% kids that aren't, and make sure these kids get an opportunity. There's 132 FBS schools, I think. If you look at how many transfers each school is using now, it's probably at least 10 scholarships a year for transfers. Well, what's that doing to high school football, where those kids aren't getting the opportunity to play, because there aren't that number of scholarships in FBS anymore because kids are transferring. So the group of five is becoming, the minor league, so to speak. And I hate to use that term, not to denigrate anybody in the group of five, but a lot of those kids are playing there 1 year. No, they're transferring to the FBS schools. There's so many ramifications to not having organization in place that's why I think we need somebody really focused on college football and getting it right.
It's hard because if the calendar were easy, someone would have come up with it by now. Like the Penn State backup quarterback hitting the portal right as they're about to go into the playoff, and everybody's like, man, this is a sign that the system is broken. And you realize that, in terms of you talk about trying to get all the student athletes to be able to get degrees and stuff. Well, you can't transfer in February and hope to be able to do things like that. And, it's just, it's a mess with all that's associated with that. And so you feel like you provide for one side, you take away from the other. And I agree. I think there needs to be somebody sitting down and saying, guys, we need to factor everything into this college football calendar that might not appease everyone, but we need to do a better job of figuring out what this looks like in the modern world of college football. Gary, you're the best. Really, really appreciate the time, man. Wish you the best of luck on everything this postseason and beyond. I know you'll be on top of all these changes and everything that's coming at our sport.
Thanks, Connor. Appreciate it. Always enjoy talking with you at this time of the year, and have a Merry Christmas, and I hope to see you at the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl.
Absolutely. You too, man.
Take care.
All right, Will, let's close with some lad of the week. We both have coaches, and I know yours because we talked about it before we came on, but that was just to make sure that we were different in this regard. Can I go first here?
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to go first because I feel like this went totally under the radar. You know what? This didn't go under the radar. This happened probably like 4 or 5 hours after we recorded the other day, and we spent so much time talking about Belichick, and I was looking at my phone every 2 seconds just to make sure I wasn't getting punked or something like that.
Bro, when that report came out that he was still considering it, I was sweating.
Yeah. It's like, oh, is this actually not going to happen? And
you got to get back on the horn. We record the podcast.
We record this thing. Oh, we're going to have to delete a bunch of stuff. No, it ends up actually happening. But I was so locked into that it almost went under the radar. Dan Mullen is his new coach at UNLV. How about that? Dan Mullen is my lad of the week. Cousin Eddie, the prophecy, to return to Vegas. He makes it happen. I think I tweeted out that GIF of Cousin Eddie, and I think maybe 6 people understood that reference. But it makes sense. It does. UNLV, the pride of Guy Fieri. Dan Mullen is returning to college football, and not just in an analyst role, and not just in a role wherein he tries to troll Florida on a weekly basis. Actually coaching football again. And I think it's a really nice fit. There's clearly part of Dan Mullen that would have loved to have gotten a job as a power conference coach and kind of gotten back to what he did at Mississippi State, where it's one of those jobs where, yeah, like you get some 4 stars in there, but it's mostly, 3-star guys, and, you win a bunch of games, you put up a bunch of numbers, and people are like, man, look what he's doing with that amount of talent. And he's going to have the opportunity to be able to do something like that at UNLV. I'm sure if the right opportunity had come up earlier, he would have been able to take it. But, I was kind of wondering if Mullen was going to become kind of our generation's Bill Cowher, of that guy who you still just assume he's going to get back into coaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's young enough.
It's actually kind of crazier too that Cowher is staying on air, because I started to balk and be like, oh, Cowher's like a football guy but he's stayed on air this whole time. Like, he hasn't even tried, really.
Yeah, and I thought Mullen would kind of do that. He really seemed to be liking the TV thing. They wouldn't have been doing that Thursday night stuff with our guy Matt Berry if Mullen wasn't like fully on board, and he very much was. They went to a bunch of these different places, and I'm sure it was fun for him to be able to see that side of it. And as I've talked about before, Mullen had a good life. Mullen was, before he came on a couple of years ago, we had him on, and he was, or I guess that was last year. Yeah, that was going into the 23 season. And, he had spent obviously that full off season, being able to do whatever he wanted. And one of the things he said was like, man, I did a few radio hits, but pretty much the last 8 months, I've been able to do whatever I want. And lived in Lake Oconee. He was like, oh yeah, right after this is the only thing I have to do all day. I'm gonna hop off this call and go on my brother's boat and just hang out. And Dan Mullen lived a good life, like a really good life as an analyst, as a coach that felt like, all right, I've accomplished a lot. Maybe this era of the sport isn't necessarily for me. I think I still have some football in me, but I'm not feeling like I absolutely need to do this right now. And maybe that'll hurt him in this role, but I tend to think that this is a guy that still is just so good at what he does schematically from an offensive standpoint that I wouldn't bet against him. And I wouldn't bet against him, especially after seeing what Barry Odom just did in that exact job. And now he is able to parlay that into a core 4 job, albeit one that needs a lot of work at Purdue. But still, I think that's kind of the path that Dan Mullen would like to be able to follow. So good for him for being able to get back into college football. Looking forward to watching some Dan Mullen offenses. They're UNLV creeping into the multi-view conversation, especially with what they did this past year. You're like, hey, I'm going to have to make sure that this is appointment viewing to be able to watch this team play. Dan Mullen back in college football.
Yeah, I think that history has kind of indicated Dan Mullen. I'm going to be honest with you. As a guy who was critical of Dan Mullen and his ability to win the big one, which...
You're really critical of Dan Mullen.
I was right about his ability to win the big one.
Fair.
But I think as things have gone since then, right, he was essentially fired for recruiting, which is something that I know a lot of stuff happened at the end there. I'm not discounting that. But when it comes to like what the buzz was around Dan Mullen, we talked about it the other day. It's actually great that he's your lad of the year, because we can even follow up on that.
Lad of the week, not of the year. Lad of the year.
Sorry,
would be a little bit
you're
too
so
much.
right. You're so
Yeah.
right. Lad of the week. You're so right. Yeah, maybe if he got the Ohio State job, we'd be talking about lad of the year.
Lad
but
of the decade.
So
man.
yeah, right. So point being, speaking of that, shout out Chip Kelly. So point being, like, that was the type of role that I thought Mullen was going to end up in, because we had hit ourselves in the head and said this guy can't recruit. Florida has not really had a better recruiting class since his 2020 class. Granted, they had a class last year with the 2 5-stars and DJ and LJ, and basically like they got a couple of 5-stars, but in terms of the depth of the recruiting, it's not like they've been a top 3 recruiting program since then. And schematically, I mean, I used to fear Dan Mullen because he would get these guys open. Kadarius Toney, he kept that guy on the field, and the Chiefs couldn't do that. So like I think at the end of the day, developing Kyle Pitts the way he did, I think that now that enough time has passed and we've really seen what excellence looks like. I said it at the time. I think he'd be a perfect guy for the 12-team playoff. I think that Dan Mullen's team were always creeping around the 12-team playoff, and he probably would still be at Florida if that was the system, because he would have I think a couple of playoff appearances. He made the SEC championship game, obviously, in 2020, ill-fated. They played well, but they just never really led. And so point being, I think he's one of the best offensive minds in football. It's weird to me that he did do the player management recruiting part of it instead of taking a Chip Kelly role. But at the same time, he knows what he likes. And I think he got the perfect job for him. And I think he's going to be off-grid. And you're going to see these crazy, gaudy numbers. And I'm sure, it's 6-8 months from now, we're going to be going, huh? Oh, that Dan Mullen coaches that guy. He has 1,000 receiving yards. That's where he came from.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. It's a good point. You look back on that 2020 Florida team, which was one of the most fun, explosive SEC offenses of the playoff era. And you kind of look back and you're like, Kyle Pitts has really struggled to live up to that billing in the NFL. Obviously, Kyle Trask has been in a situation as a backup, and he's probably going to end up holding a clipboard for a long time, but had an opportunity, and ultimately Baker takes it, wins that job, and runs with it. And then, Trayvon Grimes hasn't had the NFL career, and then Kadarius Toney, like, we don't need to get into that, but kind of look back on that, and you're like, wait a minute. It's not like there was the Percy Harvins of the world, like what Florida has had at different times, and guys that have just gone on to have great success, or guys that were lightly used at Florida and then they exploded in the NFL. They don't like to see that either. That's usually an indictment of like, oh man, maybe the coaches didn't really do right by them. But yeah, that team was really darn good. And I'm sure
fun
that
to watch.
Mullen would love to be able to get back to that at some point in his career and find a team that could do all those different things, that led the nation in passing too. Like at no point during Mullen's time at Mississippi State would you ever be like, oh yeah, that guy one day is going to lead the nation's top passing attack too.
Super
but he adjusted
adaptive.
so well.
Like, that's kind of the thing. It's like, you look at Nick Fitzgerald and you look at Kyle Trask, and it's like, those are completely different players. Anyway.
Very different players. So yeah, Mullen, not quite lad of the year, not just yet. We'll if Dan Mullen is in the college football playoff next year with a first round bye, then we can maybe have that discussion.
See if you can call up their AD at UNLV, because that guy's had a wild year. Anyway, I'm sure he'd love to talk. Maybe, I don't know, but he's had some weird. He had his quarterback hit the portal when they're like 4-0. Anyway, my lad of the week. All right, so this is probably ruffle some feathers. I see the 1-star reviews come in here, but I'll go ahead and say it. Deion Sanders. Okay, I'm going to make a really specific case here. I am now going to, at the risk of bad radio, read the wins that Colorado had before this 9-win season. You guys are ready? 4. You guys called that a disappointment. 1, 4, 4, 5, 5, 5, 10. Our boy Mike McIntyre. Great. A lot of coach of the year love there. 4, 2, 4, 1, 3, 5, 3, 5, 6, 2, 7. We're in the year 2005, folks. The teams that have had the chance at Colorado to win 9 games. How many 7-win teams we got in there? And so I say that to say, Deion Sanders is loud and brash. I've talked a lot about him. We could talk about what he did, with Prime Prep in Texas, and I promise you, I've talked about that more than almost anybody, about the Deion thing, because it's a real reason to not like Deion. The rest of the stuff is not. I think that Deion Sanders triggers a certain kind of fear in people, and I'm not going to go with the big, woke agenda part of that. What I'm going to say is that Deion Sanders is a person who is so talented at being a football player that he kind of laughs in the face of how we think this whole thing works. And that intimidates the heck out of people. Part of it, I often on this podcast talk about bigger things like capitalism and stuff. And we're taught in coaching that to build a great coach, you got to get yelled at. You got to hold a clipboard. You got to sit there and start off as a GA and make $30,000 a year and, wear used undies. Well, for Deion Sanders, he was the greatest corner of all time. He might be the greatest defensive player of all time. He's certainly one of the most explosive athletes in the history of football. And he's a good head coach, guys. And I know that his son plays for him. I know that, he had Travis Hunter. The beautiful thing is that we're using each one to discredit the other. If you can land a 5-star recruit at Jackson State, you could probably land a 5-star recruit at whatever your program is. So I would look around at your own head coach and think, how many of those do we have before we start throwing stones at Deion Sanders? Deion Sanders has a quote that I had as my home for my browser for a while. And you could probably relate to this. Basically, he said, I don't care about your opinion of me. What about me would make you think that I care? I have been him. I have been a game changer. I have been a playmaker. I've done this all before. when you hear that from a head coach, when you hear, the writers giving him crap, and again, it's not all been professional. I would give Deion advice on things that I don't understand, and he probably understands better than me because he hasn't treated the media great. Some of the videos, some of the tweets, I would try to clean that up. But at the end of the day, if we're going to say that winning is all that matters, Deion has done that in a way that nobody anticipated at Colorado. Last year, they got ranked early. We called them a disappointment because they had, again, their most wins since 2019. At 4 last year. Okay. So I think that there is something about Deion walking off of the analyst desk at NFL Network, Barstool, going to Jackson State, getting the 5-star recruit, doing all that ruffles people the wrong way because they feel like he, quote unquote, skipped the line. And like I said, I think that is part of the capitalism thing where we all see ourselves in famous people, billionaires, whatever, and think if I just worked hard enough, that could be me. Well, a guy like Deion Sanders flies in the face of all that. You can be great at 2 different things if you have the type of charisma and work ethic that Deion has shown. You don't just roll out of bed and be the greatest corner of all time. You don't just play baseball. Yeah, I didn't even mention the fact that he played Major League Baseball, right? It is work ethic, but it's also talent, and that's okay. And I think it's good to root for talented players. I think Travis Hunter is an incredibly talented player. And so as I saw this conversation evolving, it was almost like the people who, and there's a lot more going on here. I'm not trying to, make that trivial, but as the people who would say talent and beautiful football is something that's worth watching, and people say you got to pay your dues. That's why I don't like Deion Sanders. And at the end of the day, I want to watch good football. I like compelling characters. I like guys that will be wearing sunglasses and say, "I've been him. You can't take that away from me. I got a gold jacket. You're gonna come to my house and rip it out of my closet? That's cool to me, So I think in an age of dabos who keep everything, buckled down, and we don't get any access to these coaches, and they never give us any quotes. Having it fun again, like wrestling style guy out there is awesome for us. And if you hate him, it's working. Congratulations.
We were watching the Heisman ceremony with my mom and her fiance were in town. And one of the things that my mom said as they showed Deion, who was there with Shedeur, and it was like Shedeur was on Deion's left and Travis Hunter was on his right. And my mom was like, Shedeur Sanders. Oh, it's funny that Deion's quarterback has the same last name. Is that just a coincidence? I was like, oh, no, it's actually his son. She's like, it's his son? And I was like, yeah, and the funny thing is he's probably going to be the number 1 pick. I was like, wait, and then she's like, wait a minute. So he's going to have like the number 1 pick and then the Heisman win? If you had told anyone this when Deion signed up at Colorado, which I'm sure you could probably go back and find a quote where he said something like that. And you think he said something like that at some point in this offseason. I admittedly laughed and was like, wait, he's going to have 2 of the top 3 picks. He really thinks that that's how this is going to play out with Shedeur and Travis Hunter.
They had, I would say, the worst offseason maybe ever when it comes to I'm not talking about scandals. I'm not talking about crimes. Just PR wise, this was a horrible offseason for them. I get
Could have been
that.
worse. Could have been worse. If Shedeur had gotten hurt or
Right.
Travis Hunter had gotten hurt, then it would have been even worse. But
it was all self-created. That's the thing.
Yeah. And I think what's actually like an underrated part of this whole like year 2 rise, and obviously, it culminates with Travis Hunter winning the Heisman and Shedeur developing into maybe the best quarterback in college football, depending on who you ask, is he nailed his coordinator hires. And I did not think he would. The Robert Livingston thing is so underrated with that defense and how good they became. And they weren't a perfect unit, but I think they improved by like 90 spots in FBS in terms of yards per play allowed. And we're night and day better. And the Pat Shurmur thing, I was like, wait a minute. Deion hired Pat Shurmur as his OC. What is he doing? Like, that doesn't make any sort of sense. And to see that play out after he stripped Sean Lewis of play calling duties last year and he ends up leaving, he goes to San Diego State. I'm thinking, they have no direction offensively. This is going to be a joke. Shedeur is going to be exposed to even more hits than he was. No. He nailed both those hires. And when we talk about whether or not you're going to make it as a head coach, can you recruit big-time talent? Can you nail the quarterback decision? Can you nail your 2 biggest assistant hires? Deion kind of checked all those boxes, and that's why they're sitting in this spot. Yes, a 9-3 team that is not playing in the college football playoff, but still a team that had the type of year that a lot of fan bases would have killed for. I mean, let's call it what it is. To have your guy getting that kind of love, both at the college level and at the NFL level, like, I'm going to have to go back and figure out, and we'll see if this happens. I'm sure this stat will be thrown out there. Colorado PR will have this out there of like how many coaches in the same year could have the Heisman winner and the number 1 pick and be 2 separate guys. I mean,
wow.
that would be That's insane to think about.
Yeah.
And we would have laughed at Deion. We would have all laughed at him if he had said upon arrival in Boulder, "This is what I'm going to do," and he did it.
Yeah.
You're right.
And
good choice.
But to your point, okay, the Sean Lewis thing, great hire at the time. Meddling that way, that was immature. Okay, we could say that. Everything is not perfect.
Yeah.
He has made mistakes, but he learned from that. And to your point, we were all sitting there going, not sure what this is going to fail, because everything we knew about football said it was going to go this way. But when you're talented, some of that stuff doesn't matter. When you have Travis Hunter, some of that stuff doesn't matter. When you have Shadur Sanders, and the funny thing about that is, like, it's like, buddy, wait for this. There are several more of them.
There's a lot of sand. Yeah.
And again, valid criticism. What are you going to do when your son's not there? What are you going to do when you know Travis Hunter? Now we've moved the goalpost. That's all I want to. That's all I want to say is that, okay, 4 wins. That's a disappointment. Cool. 9 wins. That's now you're whatever you are there. You didn't win your conference. You know, if we look at like Kenny Dillingham, who we say is like this super duper young coach, he's been in coaching since 2007.
Since he was 17. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, think about how much more coaching experience he has than Deion. And so, yeah, like, we could talk about this young guy as a great story, and he is. And we both agree with that. I think he deserves some Coach of the Year love. Deion has less coaching experience than that guy. He was just great on air and great as a player and great as a baseball player. So, yeah, I think that's what's so interesting. It's like, hey, they didn't participate in their conference championship, but who among us? So Brian Kelly didn't either, okay? So
Lads of the week are analysts turn coaches. Yes.
There you go.
Deion Sanders. Both very prolific in both endeavors. All right. Just a little reminder of our schedule. We are going to preview all things playoff with a pod that drops on Thursday. And then our plan is we're going to recap the playoff, the first round of it, on Sunday. So it'll kind of be like a standard in-season pod, the way that we'll do that and the way that we'll roll that out. So you're kind of getting 3 pods in 1 week from us. No big deal. And then we're going to preview all those other bowl games next week. So that's kind of the tentative schedule. It's a little bit different than we typically do it in season. So yes, if you are for whatever reason not subscribed, you should subscribe right now. Leave us a 5-star review. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Set Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.